opportunities as men, and to be valued as intelligent, competent persons. However, anti-feminists have worked against the feminist movement throughout the 20th century that have succeeded in generating debilitating stereotypes. The reputation that feminists are man-hating lesbians who never shave and burn bras is one of the more extreme images. Other critiques of the feminist movement has been that it has only advocated for middle-class white women. More recently, sentiments that feminism is dead because equality has already been achieved and that there are more important dilemmas that we need to address are commonplace. I knew I could not be the only person who still believes in feminism. On September 20th, 2014, when Emma Watson first released her He for She campaign, a solidarity movement for gender equality funded by the UN, I recognized that a fourth wave of the feminist movement could be on the rise. Well, actually, I panicked and I thought, Emma Watson's done my project. I'm supposed to compete with Emma Watson, but I was reassured that this was not the case. And so I decided to determine exactly what the status of feminism is in today's society, specifically among young adults. Other studies of this nature have primarily engaged qualitative methods with a particular group of people. However, I wanted to know the general attitude towards feminism amongst all Canadian young adults. Feminism has several theoretical frameworks or lines of thought, and I've chosen 4 to ground my project. Liberal feminism is thought to be the first formal theory of oppression against women, with the writings of Mary Wollstonecraft connected to the rise of liberalism. The suffragettes of the 1900s fought for the right to vote so women could influence and correct laws that perpetuate inequality. Liberal feminism includes advocacy for female autonomy, independence, involvement in the public sphere of society, and reformation of laws and policies. Radical feminist theory calls for the complete upheaval and destruction of patriarchy and the implementation of new political structures and processes. Further, they advocate for the overhaul of societal ideology surrounding what constitutes masculinity and femininity. To overcome these gender role expectations, radical feminists advocated for women-only spaces, so women can come together to learn and grow from each other without the overriding presence of males. Central to radical feminist thought is challenging the lack of women-only spaces, female inferiority, sex roles or stereotypes, and male control of the female body, as well as heteronormativity. Based on Marxist ideas, socialist feminism aims to understand the ways women are structurally oppressed as a class. It is often considered a natural characteristic for women to want to have children, stay at home, and care for their children. At the same time, their domestic skills and labor are devalued because they're considered an outcome of biology that makes women more suitable for these roles over men. Socialist feminism's core concepts are that marriage is exploitive and oppressive, there's disparity in economic positions between males and females in our capitalist society, wage gaps, and female restriction in the labor force. Multiracial feminism stands on the key concept of intersectionality. This concept involves the examination of how gender, class, and race interrelate to one another as a combined source of oppression. In other words, the experience of oppression is different if you're a woman and if you're a woman and Black. Alice Walker was the first to speak of womanism rather than feminism, and defined it in terms of elements that require love of culture and self and appreciation of women of color. Bell Hooks is another influential feminist thinker who argued feminism should strive to diminish oppression rather than to gain equality, as equality with whom is ambiguous. Through a quantitative analysis, I will explore attitudes towards feminism amongst young adults. And in doing so, I aim to answer the question, to what extent do Canadian young adults agree with the 4 feminist theories of liberal, radical, socialist, and multiracial feminism? Further, are there particular demographics that agree more or less with these theories? The population I investigated was English-speaking Canadian adults ages 18 to 29. I implemented convenient sampling through Facebook, augmented with snowball sampling. I also contacted several professors at Dalhousie to attempt to reach potential participants outside the immediate network. This resulted in a sample size of 478 respondents, of which 73% were female and 60% identified as feminists. The web-based author-generated survey consisted of 41 questions, of which 29 were dependent variables, operationalized to represent key concepts of each of the 4 theories. Examples of survey questions include, we need to make changes in current laws and policies in order to make society more equitable for people of all genders. There should be additional labels to man and woman when discussing gender. The tradition of the woman taking the man's last name in a marriage should be discouraged. And my gender is the primary source of oppression that I experience. The responses were in Likert scale format from 1 to 5. Because I'm investigating extent of agreement with each feminist theory overall, I compiled individual survey questions that represented the concept of each respective theory into standardized indexes to represent one dependent theory variable. I also included one open-ended, qualitative-oriented question that asked, what does feminism mean to you? 11 questions in the survey inquired about the demographics of the sample. Based on past studies who focused on certain groups of people, I chose specific demographic categories to test with each theory, as these studies had made conclusions that aligned with one or a few of the theories. Although I had several hypotheses, the most prominent were that there would be an overall trend towards a higher rate of female agreement with all 4 feminist lines of thought among the sample. Stereotypes of feminism had led me to infer that men believe the feminist movement has a goal of creating obstacles to males in an effort to make females superior. Secondly, those participants who identify themselves as feminists would surely result in higher agreement with all 4 theories than those participants who do not. So these 4 graphs represent overall agreement trends with each theory by all participants. The x-axis, the x-axis is the agreement score, which ranges from 0 to 1. 0 indicating no agreement with the values of the feminist theory, and 1 indicating complete agreement. The y-axis is the percentage of respondents who resulted in that score. Liberal feminism, in the top left-hand corner, is the only theory with a distribution skewed to the left, which indicates a high agreement with the theory. You can also see that just over 10% of participants indicated they agreed 100% with the concepts of liberal feminism. However, radical, socialist, and multiracial feminism all display approximately normal distributions, indicating that participants neither strongly disagreed nor strongly agreed with the theory overall. To examine the impact of particular identities on agreement with each theory, I employed linear regression. Regression is a statistical process that estimates relationships between variables. So what is the effect of y if x changes? Bivariate regression examined a single identity with a theory. All identities except for gender and feminist identification resulted in variations between categories of 5% or less, and were also not statistically significant. Therefore, I'm presenting them today as controls in multivariate regression. Multivariate regression assesses the impact on the relationship between x and y variables when other x variables are held constant. This table here represents the multivariate results of agreement scores of gender and feminist identification with each theory. Liberal, radical, and socialist feminism resulted in similar patterns. Males consistently scored lower than females, and feminists scored higher than non-feminists, which supports my hypotheses. Results regarding multiracial feminism, however, are the most surprising. Males and feminists resulted in average scores opposite of trends seen in liberal, radical, and socialist feminism. So males had an average score lower than female, or higher than females, and feminists had an average score lower than non-feminists. Surprisingly, racial identity did not result as a statistically significant indicator of agreement levels with multiracial feminism. However, 90% of my sample indicated they identify as white, so perhaps results may differ with a more diverse sample. When asked specifically, what does feminism mean to you, an overwhelming amount of participants said equality, equal rights, or same rights between men and women. 83% of responses resulted this way. only 6% acknowledged the element of intersectionality. These responses said things like, feminism supports all orientations, races, and classes. Common stereotypes did appear in responses. Man-hating was the most prominent by far among these negative ideas of what feminism is, with some participants believing feminism has become a synonym for misandry. The stereotype that all feminists are lesbians didn't actually appear once. Many of these negative responses were also contradictory. For example, feminism is when women are out of control to protect their rights. Women should not be the head of household or play football. Women should have the same rights, though. Other participants had issue with the term feminism itself, believing the term should be changed to be more encompassing. For example, one participant said, I think equalism would be a better term. Feminism has a negative connotation. So what does all this mean for feminism? First of all, the fact that liberal feminism has the highest tendency of agreement speaks to how young adults do not seem to believe that there is a need for radical change in our society. Radical and even socialist feminism calls for complete structural change, whereas liberal feminism maintains belief in our democratic system to make change. The little agreement with multiracial feminism suggests that either my predominantly white sample does not relate to the concepts within this theory, or that what minority and Black feminists have had to say is simply ignored. The results that very few identities have a significant impact on agreement levels with feminism is not necessarily a bad thing, as there seems to be a convergence of feminist understanding between demographic groups. For example, the little variation between education levels could be attributed to feminism becoming more mainstream, with figureheads such as Emma Watson generating dialogue about feminism that is accessible to people of all education levels. We see that media plays a larger role than academia when it comes to promoting feminism. Employment status also had little impact on the relationship between workers and feminist issues. Whether this is because wage disparity is being reduced or that individuals are not aware of gender discrimination in this context is beyond the scope of this research. This project did have certain limitations that may impact the generalizability of the findings. The recruitment strategy of convenience sampling, which relied on my own social network, was not representative of the entire population of study. For example, racial minorities and parents were not well represented, and therefore these results may have low reliability. Further, as the survey was author-generated to represent the concepts of each theory, certain variables may not contain high validity and could be refined to better encompass the concepts of feminism. Feminism is certainly not dead. It might not package perfectly into one theory, however, it might be better if it does not. Individuals should be able to define what feminism means in the context of their life without having to align to a theoretical construct. A large-scale social movement that we have seen in the past may be a challenge if, evidently, everyone has a different aim in mind of what needs to be changed and achieved. When has social change ever been easy, though? This movement may not come soon, as this study has enlightened us to the view that a structural overhaul is not what is deemed necessary. We must start somewhere, though, and perhaps Emma Watson's He for She campaign is the beginning. The way gender issues are presented and interpreted could aid in reminding our population that although women may not formally be restricted in participating in society, there continues to be disparity in the way women are treated, viewed, and valued that is debilitating to all of society. Thank you. Yes, I did it.
Keep asking questions. Really liked your presentation.
Thank you.
I'm curious as to why you decided to go with theoretical orientation as opposed to the waves orientation.
Okay.
And what do you think in terms of a fourth wave feminism, which you referenced in terms of Emma Watson? So first, why did you choose to go with a theoretical bent as opposed to the movement? And what is fourth wave feminism?
So initially, I I was hesitant actually to do the honors program because I was very hesitant about the research process. I didn't think that I was a fan of it. So I wanted to take and test theories, and I wanted to do like a theory thing rather than an exploratory research project. So really I wanted to test these feminist lines of thought and these feminist theories of, is this still an adequate way to describe our society, to describe what people think about feminism, and to understand the ways that feminism is discussed or at least promoted. So I really wanted to see if those theories, which really did begin in the early 1900s, still apply to our society now. And then the fourth wave, which is coming up, I hope, I'm hoping that these critiques of how exclusive the feminist movement is start to be broken down. So a lot of people, you know, the exclusivity of middle-class white women, I think that we're starting to move away from that, but there have also been critiques that the feminist movement has kind of ignored trans women, or even a lot of black feminists, they say a lot and it's not heard a lot of the time. So I'm hoping that this fourth wave will kind of break open feminism as this awesome thing that can be beneficial to everyone, whether you're a female, whether you're a male, whether you're any racial identification. I'm really hoping that we can sort of talk about feminism instead of maybe focusing on a theory, like what do we want it to be? Okay, let's make it that. Okay. That answers the question.
I have a couple of things for you. The first being, so overall you'd say that feminism should steer away from theory, and that theory has been a negative kind of, or
right.
Now.
So I really hesitate to say that we should steer away from theory. I really like theory. I think it's a really useful tool for understanding things. But I think that feminism at this point is kind of right on the edge of either being something that we totally move away from because humanism or equalism is better, to something like we bring back and redefine feminism. So based on my results, people are very almost apathetic about what feminism stands for. And so I think either, not necessarily that we move away from theory, but that we combine the elements of these theories that people actually advocate for and want to see promoted again, and create an additional theory that maybe even brings in new elements.
So just like, instead of focusing on theory and education on what feminism was, kind of focus, kind of disregard all of that and move, or not disregard,
but yeah, I think we just need to build and grow from it.
Okay, and then also, you have mentioned black feminists quite specifically. Have you not encountered other?
Yes, so I got this in some of my other practice stuff. Yes, there's obviously other racial minority feminists, but predominantly there is a theoretical or almost its own movement of black feminism. It is specifically defined as black feminism, but I'm sure that also encompasses other racial minorities. It's just the most prominent of ones of that nature.
It might have to do with North America.
Yes, that as well.
Cool.
Yeah.
Well, very much on that front, what do you think the intersection is with the rise of murdered and missing Indigenous women, which is probably the biggest issue, and certainly has been, the dominant feminist organizations, at least in English Canada, being critiqued for not being more involved in the movement. What does your research say about that kind of intersection?
I don't know what the research says about it actually, but my own opinion is this sort of element that intersectionality is still a very academic concept. It's not sort of in the lay language, and I think that there is this misunderstanding that feminism only advocates for a certain type of female. And I think that the lack of either advocacy or speaking out about this, I don't want to call it a phenomenon, but this tragic event of thousands of Aboriginal and Indigenous women going missing, I think that just also speaks to the fact that minorities are not being listened to. They're not being included in these movements for equity and being advocated for as equally as important and intelligent and incompetent persons that women throughout the 20th century have, you know, striven so hard to be seen as. And I think that we need to now bring in these other groups that obviously have been left behind.
Right, we should, we have to move on to the next presentation.